Should we find just move? Yeah. Yes, the microphone is on. Yeah. Just need to.
Okay. Good morning, colleagues. Good morning, everyone. Yeah, good to see everyone. Packed room. So welcome to our first seminar for 2026. So we have a series of these seminars happening almost on a monthly basis. So this first one is being opened by Ofer Gon. So also morning to those who are joining us online. Ofer Gon joined the then J.L.B. Smith Institute of Ichthyology, now the NRF-SAIAB, at the end of 1982. It was initially a one-year contract, and he came in to assist Margaret Smith and Philip Himstra with their work on the Smith sea fishes, to which Ofer contributed 2 chapters. In 1984, Ofer was awarded a scholarship from the German government to study the fishes of the Senckenberg Nature Museum in Frankfurt under the supervision of Professor Clausewitz. I hope I'm pronouncing correctly there. Clausewitz, yes, okay. Before leaving for Germany, the Institute contracted Ofer to work on a new book, The Fishes of the Southern Ocean, with Phil Himstra. Consequently, after moving to Germany, to Europe, Ofer spent 6 months studying tropical cardinal fishes from fishes and Antarctic fishes in European museums. The book on the fishes of the Southern Ocean was published at the end of 1990. And to cite the feedback that he got from colleagues, it became the Bible of Antarctic fishes. The Fishes of the Southern Ocean project included participation in several expeditions to the Southern Ocean, mostly to the Prince Edward Island. In 1993, Ofer was given a permanent research position that allowed him to pursue his own research interests in marine fish systematics. And at the same time, he was asked to contribute a chapter on the history of fish collections in South Africa to the American book on the history of fish collections around the world. Ofer retired at the end of 2014, and he has continued to work in close association with the SAIAB as a research associate until the present day. And we look forward to listening to your talk. Ofer is also one of the long-time-serving members of the Institute, so we're privileged to have him coming back here to share his insights with us. Thank you, Ofer.
Thanks, Albert, and hi, everybody. Nice to see so many people here. I decided I'd do this talk because there are many new faces at SAIAB. Students, new staff, postdocs, visitors, etc. And I believe it's always good to know something about the place you work at. The history of this place is unique because I'm not aware of any other place in the world where ichthyology started from chemistry. And this is what happened here. And that's more or less what I'll tell you about. As you can see in this photo, SAIAB and DIFS are actually twins. They all started from the same place. The history is basically about the life and work of 2 people, Margaret and J.L.B. Smith. What I will be telling you is about how they contributed to the start of SAIAB as the J.L.B. Smith Institute of Ichthyology, I'm not going to go further than that because that's more or less well known. I'm not going to get into a hell of a lot of details, but if you want to know more about this history, it's all in here, in this book that was published in 1997. It says here 50 years for the J.L.B. Smith Institute of Ichthyology, which is not actually right. If you remember, in 2018, we also celebrate 50 years to the J.L.B. Smith Institute. It's all about dates, as you will see here. Now, at the first glance, you would think, why are we here in Grahamstown when there's no ocean, there's no port or harbor for research vessels or anything like that? And considering that all of this started marine, it's a bit strange. But if you think about it, it's actually not that strange, because Grahamstown is actually very well placed relative to the major centers in South Africa. We are more or less the same kind of distance from Cape Town, from Durban, and from Joburg and Pretoria. So from that point of view, it does make sense, because as we know, I'm sure Albert knows, we have to travel a lot to these places. Okay, let's get into the story. So J.L.B. Smith is a very interesting person, very eccentric character, very uncompromising as well. You will get different opinions about his personality, but we're not going to get into this. It's not important for our story. So amongst the things he did was also a military stint during the First World War, during which he contracted some serious tropical disease, and he was discharged as not able to be a soldier anymore. So he came back and finished his studies, and then came to Grahamstown in 1923 as a lecturer at the chemistry department, and he lectured in organic chemistry, which means he knew a lot about how to make explosives, about poisons that come from animals, etc., etc., and he made use of that knowledge later on. The way he looked at himself is like this. He was obsessed with fish, and he says it was from very early age, and it's absolutely true. We know that from correspondence and from his own stories to friends and colleagues. But I wouldn't believe the last sentence that he says he couldn't get out of it. Of course he could. He was a very smart man. I don't think he wanted to get out of it. Then in 1938, he married Margaret Smith. Now, Margaret Smith was his student. And the story goes that one day he walked up to her and he says, "You're going to be my wife." And she did. But in truth is, he actually went to her parents first and asked for permission to marry her, and then he went to her. A few details about Margaret. She actually, when Smith died in 1968, she took over, and basically she is the one that established the J.L.B. Smith Institute, but is now SAIAB. Okay, so the most important period in the history of the Institute is those years between 1938 and 1947. And keep in mind that during this period of time, we also had the Second World War, and South Africa participated in that war. South Africa spent money on that in that world. After the war, which ended in 1945, the economic situation in the world was on its face. Money was hard to come by, and that's also important for our story. So I'll go to this point one by one, and we'll see how we go. So the Smiths, they were a very good team. They worked together very well in the field, at the university. Margaret actually became his lifeguard, if you want. The story is that she would stand in the door, and ask anybody who wanted to see Doc Smith, why do you want to see him? He's busy. And she would decide who can see him and who could not. That kind of thing. And she was also, so they are here in the field in Mozambique, and Smith continued always to do his fishing. And Margaret was also a good artist, and she did the fish illustration for Smith's work, in the early years at least. That is the announcement of a marriage, and Margaret also participated actively in fish collecting, as you can see there. And in the field, what she would do is she would sit in the boat or on the beach and take color notes of the fish, and then back home here in Grahamstown, she would complete the illustration, as you could see in the plate on the lower side there. Okay, so the first important event is the seal account. It was Christmas 1938. The Smiths were already married. It was an international event, as I'm sure you all know, and it's a big story. If you want to know anything in more details about that, there are actually books about this. But I think one of the more interesting accounts of this is in Smith's own book, Old Four Legs, which we do have in the library. This kind of discovery catapulted Smith into international fame immediately, overnight. He was the subject of interviews and questions from colleagues, from media all over the world, and he became very busy with it. But at the same time, he learned to appreciate information networks, and that was a very important thing for him later on. He used it to raise funds for his trips, for his books, for publications, and he was very efficient with it. The very good example for that is the 1952 discovery of the second seal account, which is down there at the bottom. The way he was going about this, if you remember that maybe, that was also Christmas time, and that fish was found in the Comoro Islands in the Western Indian Ocean. How do you get from South Africa to the Comoro Islands in Christmas? So that's where his information networks came into play, very spectacularly. Earlier on, after the discovery of the first seal account, when he realized how important it is to be networked, he made sure that everything he did and everybody he collaborated with was aware of what he was doing, including some of his friends from college and university, some of whom became ministers in South Africa. For example, what he did when he published the Sea Fishes of Southern Africa in 1949, he sent copies to many of these people, including ministers. Was discovered, he decided he can only get it if he flies there to the Comoro Islands. And he started phoning around, and he was told that the only way to do it is to get an Air Force plane, and the only way to get an Air Force plane was to get permission from the president, actually not the Prime Minister, the President. So he phoned Milan on Christmas Eve, and his wife answered the phone. It was in the evening, and Milan was an old man already, and she didn't really want to disturb him. He was already in bed. So Smith was trying hard to convince her And Milan heard that she's on the phone for a long time, and she said, "Who is it?" And she says, "It's the guy by the name of Smith. What does he want?" He wants to go and get the fish from the Comoro Islands. And that clicked in his brain, in Milan's brain. He remembered the book. And he said, "Okay, let me talk to him. The rest is history." So that's the result. So that shows you how information networks work well. And Smith was very good at that. Okay, the second important event is Mr. Hugh LeMay. LeMay was a British guy who came to South Africa during the Boer War and decided to stay and settle here. He became an industrialist and a mining mine owner and made a lot of money. He lived in Mozambique, but he had a lot of business, and only basically his business connections were mostly in Joburg. But he was also a naturalist, and like Smith, when both of them came to a new place and started fishing there, they wanted to know what they're catching, and both couldn't tell. And that's how Smith and how him got involved in ichthyology. So he went to one of his friends in Joburg, and he said, I want to produce a book on fish that is similar to the new bird book, Robert's Birds, on South African or Southern African birds. I don't know if you know Robert Birds, but it's a book with descriptions, brief descriptions of birds and maps and illustrations at that time, paintings of the birds, similar to the plate that you've seen on the fish here. There was nothing like that on fish at that time. To cut a long story short, they came to Smith, and they offered him the job, and he accepted. And they established a trust for that, and LeMay gave him 5,000 pounds at that time, which was a lot of money. That was 1945, and remember, that's just the end of the Second World War. At that time, Rhodes University was almost bankrupt, and 5,000 rands for them was a lot of money. And he made good use of the fact that he was bringing money to the university. So again, to cut a long story short, over the years between 1923 and the early 1940s, he did more and more work on fish, to the point where chemistry became a secondary thing for him. He was just lecturing in chemistry. He decided at some point maybe he should move to ichthyology, but how to do it. And the coelacanth experience was one of the things that basically made his mind to at some point move into ichthyology, and then the book came second, and then just after the war in 1945, South Africa established what was known as the CSIR, which is the ancestor, if you want, of the NRF. And the CSIR did a study of universities and museums in South Africa to see how they're doing research. And to cut a long story short again, they awarded 4 scientists in South Africa with fellowships. Each one was £800, and Smith was one of the 4. So that again made him an important person for the management of the university. So if you take all of these things into account, he made up his mind in 1946, more or less, and he decided to move into ichthyology and abandon chemistry. And he came up with a proposal for a new department that he submitted to the council, and he also wanted to have a school for postgraduate studies on marine fishes. this is contrary to the belief of many people that he was a bad teacher, or that not that he was a bad teacher, but he didn't want to teach because he wasn't interested in students. They took too much of his time. That was absolutely not true. If you read some of the books, you will see that that was not true. In fact, some of the students kept in touch with him almost to the time he died. And eventually, in 1947, he was appointed as a professor of ichthyology. And that is 16th of May 1947. That's the date, the birth date of SAIAB and DIFS. And they're twins. Okay, so this is the original, but not the first, house or building where the Department of Ichthyology was housed at Rhodes. And that was in 1950. Before it was the Department of Zoology in here. And before Smith moved here with his collection, he was in a very small place that was basically a study area for the professor of zoology at Rhodes. So here comes LeMay again. LeMay came to visit Smith in 1947, and he was appalled by the conditions that he saw where Smith was working. It was basically one or two small rooms crammed with jars of fish, very small place for desks or anything else. And so they talked about it over lunches and things like this, and Smith more or less convinced him to give another donation of 5,000 pounds to create, to build a new laboratory. Unfortunately, it didn't work because there's two guys were opposite personalities. Smith was very happy to, always wanted, because of what he said earlier about information networks, to include the people who worked with him and helped him in his communications and media work. And LeMay was a very reluctant participant for that. He was a philanthropist, but he didn't want to be involved in major events like lunches with the media and things like this. He wanted to be anonymous, basically. And on that basis, eventually, the relationship collapsed. Attempts to repair the situation didn't work because Smith was very stubborn, and LeMay was also stubborn. The thing fell apart. And actually, that was Smith's most spectacular failure to raise fund. But in the beginning, when he was very enthusiastic about this, he actually came up with this sketch here. This sketch here, how he wanted the new building to be designed. And that was his idea when he consulted the architect at Rhodes University. And then, in 1949, history almost changed direction to the point that we wouldn't be standing here. I wouldn't be standing here and you wouldn't be here. This building wouldn't be here. And what happened was that out of the blue, the Natal Museum, which was in Pietermaritzburg, it's another national museum, approached Smith with the offer to become director there. Now, Smith was not very happy at Rhodes University because I don't know if it was because of jealousy or I don't know what, but the management kept making life difficult for him. So when this came, he decided, okay, that's my opportunity to get out of Grahamstown and come closer to where I want to be, which was Durban. And why he wanted to be in Durban? It's because he realized that his most important work would be in the Western Indian Ocean. And a lot of South African fish actually are related to Western Indian Ocean fishes. And it would be Durban would be a better place for him to launch expeditions than Grahamstown. So he actually went into this seriously, and negotiations lasted almost for the whole year with the Natal Museum, but eventually that collapsed as well, lucky for us, and he stayed in Grahamstown. But just to give you an idea how close it was, he actually booked a truck to move his household to Durban and to Pietermaritzburg, and that had to be cancelled. But it was very close. Now the reason why the negotiation fell apart was also, again, because he was a stubborn guy. He tried to convince, or to make the board of the museum to let him do as much research as he wanted, with as little administration as possible. Of course, that was not possible. He also wanted a job for his wife at the museum, which is also a difficult thing to do, but they eventually managed to do that. But then the last thing, the museum had one employee, very old guy, close to retirement, who was one of the original people who were employed at the museum at the time it was established in 1904 in Pietermaritzburg. So Smith wanted to get rid of him, but the council or the board of the museum found that difficult on a moral basis, and they refused to do that, and then Smith said goodbye. But at that point, he already resigned from Rhodes University. And after the deal went down, he had to come back to the council here and convince them to give him his post back. But that wasn't too difficult because they knew how good he was with money, and they took him back immediately. Okay, so Smith died on the 8th of January 1968. He actually committed suicide, and he concocted his own poison because he was a chemist, as you know. And apparently it was some sort of a cyanide compound that he created. Of course, he didn't say anything to his wife, and it came as a shock to everybody. But the signs were there already for several years. He maintained in correspondence that he's losing his memory, and he was afraid of becoming a burden to his family if anything happens to him that incapacitates him. He had 2 minor strokes in the early 60s, but he recovered from both. So I think he was a little bit paranoid. He also saw his doctor having a serious stroke and becoming a vegetable, more or less, and he didn't really want to become something like that. So he made his mind and he killed himself. But I think it was a little bit too early. Anyway, Margaret already made up her mind before Smith died that she would carry on if he dies before her. But at this point in time, in 1968, it was the second time that history almost changed direction again against us. When Smith died, the government, not the government, but Rhodes University was not sure. They wanted to continue maintaining the fish collection without a head of department, and there was nobody in South Africa to become a head of department to take Smith's place. And at the same time, the CSIR, who was paying him 800 pounds a year as a fellowship, also didn't think that they wanted to continue with that after he died. So that was a bit of a crisis. But Margaret was a very determined person, and she managed to convince both the university and the government to form a collaboration and create the J.L.B. Smith Institute of Ichthyology. And not only that, also that the institute needs a new place, a new building, and that's the building we are standing on. And but it took her quite a while to do that. One of the ideas at the time, when discussions were going on, was to transfer the collection either to the South African Museum in Cape Town or to the Oceanographic Research Institute in Durban. But she managed to convince them not to do that. Part of the deal between her, government, and Rhodes was teaching. And she could not teach because she was not a biologist. And so to get that going, she had to find somebody to do that. And again, there was nobody to do that in South Africa at that point in time. There was a student or a couple of students in Cape Town. One of them was Buchali, but they're not ready yet. So she went overseas, and part of the trip overseas, or the main reason for the trip overseas was to visit other ichthyological laboratories to get ideas how to build her own. And in one of the places she was in the United States, she met Tom Fraser, who was just finishing his PhD. He impressed her and she hired him. He was the first lecturer at the Institute. And from then on, things developed into a proper institute, research projects, etc. But her main wish in the memory of her husband was to revise the Sea Fishes of Southern Africa, which was published in 1949. And she started that project in 1975. Later on, in 1977, she brought Phil Hinstra, also from the United States, to help with that. I came in 1982, as you heard. Leonard Compagno came in 1983. Eric Anderson in 1989. And that's basically where the story ends with the foreigners here. And I think that's the end of the story.
Thanks a lot, Ofer. Fascinating history indeed. But Ofer, please stay on the stage for questions. Just an interesting anecdote. You saw that the coelacanth was described in 1939. But the very first fish that J.L.B. Smith described was actually a freshwater goby that you described in 1937. I don't know what happened between the goby not taking the limelight. But yeah, thanks, Ofer. Yeah. Maybe we invite any questions for Ofer. Thank you, Ofer.
The first publication of Smith was in 1931. A description of, I can't remember from the description of the species.
From chemistry?
No, the fish. Okay. He started publishing in the 1920s in chemistry.
Thank you, Ofer. Yeah. Any questions for? Yes, ma'am. Do we have any questions online?
No, nothing.
Okay. So you covered everything. I think the interesting part there is that we had two near misses, that this would have not happened. Our presence here would have not happened. I don't know what would have been in the place of this building. You know, with the potential move to Durban, and also with his with J.L.B. Smith's passing and Margaret stepping into the shoes to fill that gap. And also the other important aspect is the fact that SAIAB and Rhodes, we are twins. We actually, the building here, it belongs to Rhodes University, and we pay R1 per annum. That's right. Yes, there was a question there.
For a lease.
For a lease, yeah.
I was just wondering, hi everybody, I'm Gilza. I'm part of the extended SAIAB family. I was just wondering why it was never renamed the J.L.B. Smith and J.L.B. and Margaret Smith Institute before it became SAIAB, because it's just so interesting, this evasion of the role that women and particularly partners have played over so many years. So that was it's just an interesting observation. And if it wasn't that Margaret is really the one whose legacy really, in a way, the SAIAB actually is.
Well, the reason is very simple. I think is you don't name an institute after yourself, and Margaret is the one who named the institute after her husband, so she couldn't do it.
Yeah. But after she passed.
Yeah, nobody ever suggested it, as far as I know. An interesting point that I just remembered, and maybe it's fate, maybe it's coincidence. You might have your ideas about this. The birth date of Smith, the both Smiths is the same, 26th of September, in their own years, and they both lasted 71 years.
Yeah.
Maybe I should add a little bit about DIFS. DIFS basically was housed in this building. And in 1980, the Institute and Rhodes University split, and government took over the J.L.B. Smith Institute completely. And that was when the department was re-established, because it was stopped when the J.L.B. Smith Institute was declared in 1968. And Tom Hecht, the first major professor of ichthyology for many years, was in this building. Let me just orientate myself. Over there, the double office in that corner. And he was there for a good while. And he also had to bring foreigners to lecture. The first one was Charles Hockett from the United States, who was here for a couple of years. Very interesting chap, still around, I believe. And then the stable that used to be the stables behind us became DIFS, Rhodes University property, and DIFS moved over there.
Thank you, Ofer. Yes.
I'm not sure if I'm right, but the Smiths were also big property owners in Knysna.
Correct.
And they created the kind of a conservancy there. So they were also important in the conservation of the Knysna and what is happening around Knysna, especially the Cape Town size, the mountain size.
That's correct, yeah. Smith's family, his parents, owned a house in Knysna, which was called the Blue House. It's not blue anymore, but I don't even know if it still exists. It might have been pulled down at some point. If it still exists, it's not blue anymore. And that's where Smith got into fishing. Actually, he used to go out to the lake with his father and fish from a very young age. At some point, I'm not sure who bought the property, but it's the western side of the heads of Knysna that belonged to them. And they made a nature reserve out of it. And their son William actually ran it later on, after Margaret died. And you could take a trip. He had a little museum in there. Some of it was the history of the seal account, of course. And you could take guided tours with him on that property. But I think it's now sold because he died 1 or 2 years ago as well, yeah.
Yes. Pete, yeah?
Another Margaret question for you. So you said that his suicide was a surprise to her, but that she had already been thinking about succession and the possibility of becoming director. And they discussed that? Was that planned between the two of them? Suicide aside?
I don't think there was any plan, but when Smith started feeling that his health is going down, he worried about continuity in the department. And he tried to find people to take over from him, but as I said, there was nobody in South Africa, so he went overseas again. And he first approached an American by the name of John Randall, known as Jack Randall, if you want, who later became the name in tropical fish systematics. He offered the job, not the job, but the postdoc position to Jack, but Jack was married to a Chinese woman. And so when he said to Smith, I'm interested, but I'm married to a Chinese woman, and your government doesn't like it. So Smith's response was, come without your wife. That's the kind of person he was, yeah. So of course it didn't happen. Then he got a New Zealander who was an eel expert to come here, and he spent several years in Grahamstown. And he was supposed to take over from Smith, but he had a family, and his child, his boy, had cancer. I forget what kind of cancer, but at some point he and his wife decided they want to go back to New Zealand, where they came from, for the sake of the health of the child. And they also left. So at that point, this was just before 1968, there was nobody else. And Margaret already said to him that, not because you die, but I will continue working with fish. Yeah.
How Phil Hemstock?
Okay. Yes, sir.
How it happened that Phil Hemstock came here? Margaret arranged
Yes.
that?
Yeah. She hired him to come and help with the project of Smith Seafish's book. In 1977 he came.
Nick, you're there.
Yeah, not a question, but an anecdote about how far-reaching Old Four Legs was. Over 50 years ago, when I was a child in Canada, we would get little advertisements for books that we could order for like 25 cents, in grades 3 or 4. One of them was a condensed version of Old Four Legs, and was one of the first books I ever read. And it was one of the first things that really got me into fishes. So something that happened here influenced this little boy 5,000 kilometers away, and here I am now. And the first time I saw the Institute, I almost cried. It was so influential when I was a child. And then I was taught ichthyology by an Englishman called Richard Winterbottom, who taught Paul Skelton ichthyology here before he moved to Toronto and became one of the world's experts on Indo-Pacific gobies.
Yes, that's correct.
So it is a very small world, but everything that was done here was very far-reaching.
Yes, yeah. Winterbottom actually took over from Fraser, and he was a South African. Well, actually Zimbabwean who moved to South Africa. His father was a lecturer at the Fitzpatrick Institute at the University of Cape Town. So he was a well-known South African family quite early on in the science community.
Thanks. There is a question online. Martin, you can come through.
Hi, thanks, Albert. Yeah, I just, sorry, am I unmuted?
Yes, Martin, we can hear you.
Okay, yeah, no, just an interesting story, or not story, question or statement. William Smith, their son, I wonder how many people remember him as the guy on TV that used to do the extra maths classes. I might be showing my age, but William Smith was like the mathematics guy on TV, and you would always be watching his maths classes before exams and stuff. So, yeah, I think William Smith was sort of famous in his own right, but a generation or two later. And just a bit of trivia on the property in Eisner, that I think it's called the Western Head, the one that's not developed. As far as I know, that's called Featherbed Private Nature Reserve. And it actually houses the biggest population of blue duiker in the whole province. That's something I happened to have read a few days ago, which also just sort of jumped out at me now. So yeah, but thank you for a very, very interesting presentation. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Thanks, Martin. Yeah, I think we can move to a close. Just
all of these?
The colleagues that have joined online. Yes, yeah, they're still online. The history that Ofer has just shared with us, but looking at the impact that this has had, I was just thinking about the number of PhD students that have come through this particular institute. I think we are approaching 90 something now PhDs since the establishment of the institute. Far too many MScs to count. But what is most important is that the work that's being done and the impact that it's having in terms of guiding protection of marine species, guiding the protection of freshwater species, supporting livelihoods, food security and all that. But also most importantly, fishes connect people. You see Nick from Canada. We also have an American colleague joining us here, and many, many other people coming from many different parts of the world, and also on the African continent. And these networks started from here where we are standing. Thank you so much, Ofer, for sharing your knowledge with us.
Okay.
Thanks, everyone. Yeah.
Interesting, huh? Yes, very much. I just wish you